Hello and welcome to another conversation in practical theology. My name's Sayyyidah Zaidi and I'm here with Eric Stoddart, and today we are going to be discussing everything that has happened in the world, the big shift that has taken place in the spring of 2020, but more specifically the impact that not being able to visit places of worship is having on the spiritual and the religious communities, as well as everybody else who might have gone to places of worship as a form of shelter. I know certainly in London there is a very big challenge that communities are facing, because the normal rituals of worship seem to have shifted from something that is community focused to one that is much more within your own home. And as Muslims, for example, pray regularly on Friday, and Christians go to places of worship on Sundays, with them all being closed, it's a huge challenge that's taking place. And we'll also, I think, come on to talk about the impact that that has on funerals and weddings and, you know, other religious ceremonies, which really use places of worship as the kind of the heart for these things. How is it for you over in Edinburgh, Eric?
It's been like everyone else. Places of worship have been closed for a couple of weeks. We're adapting to doing public worship online, and I think I probably want to start the conversation from my own point of view by saying, in a tiny way, we're experiencing what many fellow worshippers of all faiths experience around the world outside of a pandemic, where many of them have to worship in secret. It's really difficult for them to get together in anything other than family groups. Churches, mosques, synagogues have been closed down for political reasons. And so I think probably just to put that for me as a starting point, to say the inconvenience that certainly I and others are experiencing is tiny, and it's just barely even a taste of what others are having to experience all year round in great physical danger. But having said that, to talk about just how we're shifting to community, but community online, and that's been really interesting to see the efforts of folks to not replicate liturgy and ritual, but to do something that supplements being on your own, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually you raise a really important point about how the way that we are experiencing faith now is a real luxury in some respects, because I know for me, for example, you know, we have our kind of weekly plan, and my son jokingly put Jummah on for Friday, which is the Friday prayer. And I was thinking, as I walked past it this morning, you know, when was the last time I was able to go, and did I really appreciate that opportunity? And what you said just a few seconds ago really reminded me of the challenges that, for example, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, and the early Muslims faced, where they had to pray within their homes, because if they were outward about their expression of faith, they would have been killed, you know, and not just chastised by the community, but, you know, probably even thrown into jail, you know. And there are lots of stories of companions of the Prophet that faced real struggle in their practice of faith. So I think that the way that you describe the kind of context for this is one that I think is really important, because for me, certainly, I think I've taken my ability to be able to practice my faith so freely for granted.
Yes, and the fact that we could simply roll up at our places of worship on whatever is the special day for us, and just not have to think about being able to walk in the door.
Yeah.
That's a big shock, and it's a big emotional challenge. And for those who are not accustomed to having that a closed door meet them, if it's their one point of social contact during the week in normal circumstances, I think certainly what churches have been trying to do is to find ways of doing things online that can, in some way, yes, compensate, but be a different way of providing that community, communal part of worship, that recognizing that for Christians, worship is not, doesn't have to be in a group. That's great, that's a luxury, that's the norm, but actually that's not at the core of it. You know, for Christians, there's the stories of Jesus going into the desert, and okay, it's a story about him being tempted by the devil and the wonders of the world and riches being placed before him, and he says, no, I'll live by the word of God. And so that solitary man in the desert, worshipping and resisting temptation, is a paradigm that's not, that is used within Christianity, but not in the sense of he was there on his own. It's often spiritualized, but at the moment, for many people, it is literally being on their own.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because, you know, there's pictures being shared on social media of how some of their elderly in other countries are really, really struggling with not being able to go to places of worship. Because I think certainly my experience is, you know, some of us in the West are perhaps more compliant, and I don't mean to use that as a loaded word, but if the government says you must do this, we're more likely just to follow, especially in a time of crisis like this. But then there was a picture of a policeman standing outside a mosque speaking to an elderly gentleman, saying to him, you know, please, for the love of God, I'm asking you not to force me to arrest you or to stop you from coming into this place of worship, because I know why you want to come, but I can't let you in. And it's the conflict that the old man was experiencing, and also the conflict that the policeman was experiencing.
Yeah, there are so many desperately sad accounts of people having to somehow come to terms with this. But I think certainly my own church leaders in Scotland have framed this very much as, this is our offering to other people in our community. To not meet together is an act of love. This is not us being told by the government you can't meet for all sorts of political reasons. This is saying, in order to serve our communities and to be loving, the loving thing at the moment is not to meet physically together. And I think that's what saddens me when I see there are one or two Christian churches in various parts of the world have been resisting government restrictions on lockdown. And to me, that's just such an appallingly bad witness to a God of love, to somehow say, this is all about politics, therefore we're going to meet, nobody can stop us meeting, only God can stop us meeting. That's not the point. The point is that this is an act of love.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. And I think it's very interesting because, for example, you know, one of the prophetic traditions that Muslim men have is that they're supposed, you know, of course there's a wide variety of belief, but you know, Muslim men should have beards as a tradition that they follow of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings upon him. Now, there are stories of consultants within the NHS and doctors being now, because there's new research that's come to light that's saying that the masks aren't able to provide 100% of protection if you've got facial hair. So these consultants are actually shaving their beards as an act of worship. And it's a really, really interesting kind of shift in dynamic, because some of these guys, they've had a beard since they were teenagers. So they've not seen their face for, you know, 20, 30 years. But because of the evidence that is available, they've made the decision that in order to keep on doing the work and serve their patients and protect themselves, it's the right thing to do. And I think is really, this whole thing is actually making individuals challenge their own faith and question their direct relationship with God. Of course, I think there is one of community and one of how we all come together, whether it be physically or online. But there's also something else that's making us think, well, you know, who is God going to pick? You know, is it going to be me? What happens when somebody close to me gets affected? And you know, even young people are now dying from this, and it's very interesting because from the statistics, I understand that 25% of the people who passed away so far as a result of coronavirus in the UK are Muslim. And if you look at the first 6 doctors that have died from the NHS of coronavirus, they're all also Muslim as well. So it's a really challenging time for my community in terms of how we're responding. And because this, you know, for example, cremation is something that is just not allowed at all. How does one then kind of do the dance with the government about the particular rituals and things and processes that we need to be adhered to, so that the red lines are not kind of, you know, broken, but the flexibility that is there it's available for all, if that makes sense.
Yes, and it is trying to work out what is actually non-negotiable in faith traditions, because there are some things that we would very much want to be able to do. And then there are some things that, for a whole cascade of theological reasons, are just deeply, deeply problematic. And I would not want to be in the position of religious leaders at the moment, having to navigate, as you say, the appropriate way of holding funerals in these sorts of circumstances. Do you know what's actually happening in terms of Muslim funerals at the moment?
So I think there is capacity. They're looking to build more kind of temporary mortuaries as well, and so that in itself is a challenge. There are new kind of rulings that have come out, and actually I know that there is a number of scholars and Muslim faith leaders working together to produce new guidance, which it's incredible because as a community, I get the impression that Muslims don't tend to really kind of adhere to one line. For example, in the Catholic Church, you know, you have the Pope and the Pope is the leader. Muslims have nothing like this. We don't have anything that's organized in terms of a structure that manages. There are organizations that try and do some of this, but I think in many ways Muslims can be quite rebellious. And so the fact that there is some organized guidance that's coming through that I think everyone is going to adhere to is a massive pivot in the right direction. And I think that's going to outline the detail of how the kind of the washing of the body can take place and how the burial will take place. From what I understand, you know, I mean, gosh, it's such a horrendous thing to have to go through, but there was the case of the 13-year-old boy who died recently in London, and he was by himself, you know. He was by himself. I'm not quite sure of the detail, but I understand that doctors are performing the funeral prayers within the morgue that holds the body, and then it's going straight for burial. And that for me is quite interesting because it means that Muslims within the NHS are having also now to step into a different role, not just of being the medical practitioner. And the government has supported the normal burial, sorry, that's the wrong word, but you know, the burial as opposed to cremation of Muslims and Jews, which I think is a huge comfort to people who might be concerned at the moment.
Yeah, and I think it's it's how that process is then navigated, and this is really requiring a huge amount of respect for very sensitive issues, not just in people's social life, but in their cultural life and their spiritual life. And it sounds like this is being handled really as best as it possibly could. And, you know, that's where religious leadership right across the board really comes into its own, that it finds ways of being respectful and recognizing just quite what some of the sensitivities are. But in terms of people being able to do things in terms of spirituality in their own home and being able to connect with others online, is your community doing sort of online Friday prayers, or how's that working?
So that's a really interesting question, because there's a lot of imams and scholars doing kind of online sermons. Now, there is a technical thing in terms of being in a mosque to be able to do Friday prayers. There's even been debates about whether people can do Friday prayers within their own home, and there is guidance being provided about that too. But there's more information and more live talks and things like this available now than there ever has been. And I personally actually am finding it really overwhelming, because you want to listen to, well, I mean, you know, I have my handful of people who I want to listen to, and I can't listen to everything that they're doing. So it's now about being really selective. And what's really good is that it's not just a lecture, you know, it's also actually providing psychological support and emotional support and things like this, which I think has taken a perhaps a shift back to tradition, you know, where sermons were much broader and they dealt with more foundational issues rather than just technicalities, if that makes sense.
That's really interesting, that the lecture talk format, sermon format, is having to accommodate so many different needs. And I think it's a testimony that people of religious faith often get a reputation for being a bit sort of stuck in the mud. But actually, when push comes to shove, people of religious faith can be remarkably flexible and find creative ways and doing things differently. I'm thinking of my own church in Edinburgh, where we would not go down the route of people having bread and wine in their own homes and the priest blessing it from a distance. I know that some Christians have adopted that pattern, but it's not something we would do. But it was intensely moving to see, we managed to have an online service on Sunday with pre-recorded bits from people's homes, but it cut back live to the priest on his own in the empty church celebrating the communion. And he took the bread and the wine on behalf of the whole of our faith community. And that was something that had never quite struck me before, about that sense of connection with the priest, that here was a priestly role where he was taking bread and wine on our behalf. So we were taking communion, but we were doing it in a sense of spiritual identification with our priest. And I had never come across that before, certainly not been part of my experience, but that was really very touching, I think.
I think what is one of the biggest kind of lessons for me to learn through this whole experience is it's not just about our individual daily practice, but it's about how we're kind of being forced to go back to traditions or practices that early faith leaders may have had, but we're doing it in a way that's enabling our survival in some respects. And so what you're describing is probably something that has been done in the past by Christian leaders, you know, and I kind of take that and for me kind of say, well, You know, Ramadan is beginning in about 3 weeks' time, and there's discussions within the community about people saying this will be the most authentic Ramadan that people have ever experienced, because, for example, the special prayers that are done, they're called tarawih, and they take place after between sunset and in the morning. Those will have to be done in the home now. Most people would go to the mosque to do them. There's going to be no big feasts, you know. So, you know, Ramadan, you know, despite the fact it's not supposed to be a lavish experience, it can become one of feasting over the fasting, and that can't happen now. You know, so it's really kind of going back to basics. And even as I was waking up this morning, I was thinking, you know, is the whole experience that we're having one where we're implementing this particular kind of saying or hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, where we're told that even when the end of time is coming, if you have a seed in your hand, you plant the seed. And I'm wondering whether this is the time when we're planting the seeds, because I'm not saying that the end of time is coming, but it's about having that hope. Because I know for me, I'm looking forward to when I can do something as simple as go to the coffee shop to buy that cup of coffee instead of having to make it in the home, where I can go food shopping without queuing, go for a walk in the park without thinking, you know, have I been out for too long? It's those simple things.
Yes, I have a friend who's been posting on social media about her experience over the past few years of discovering she has breast cancer and the treatment and then subsequent treatment for development of the condition and disease. So one of the things she said was that, you know, the uncertainty that all of us are experiencing now is what she and all her fellow sufferers experienced from that moment they discovered that something was wrong with their body, and not being able to do the things that you anticipated you'd be able to do, having huge question marks over what could happen and uncertainty, and the feelings of just not knowing. So this is what we live with all the time following our diagnosis, and that was really humbling to see. Here was someone being willing to express what that awful experience must be. But at the same time, I don't know if it's a British thing or not, but, you know, the humour that gets us through this, and religious people, despite outward appearances, sometimes can have it's a bit like medics, that black humour that gets us through difficult circumstances. I'm going to risk telling a little story that I hope none of our viewers are going to be offended by, but Maundy Thursday, big part of Holy Week for Christians, and there's a ceremony where the priest washes people's feet, demonstrating Jesus' humility in washing the dust off his disciples' feet and proving that he was a servant and not a master. And this is how people should be relating to one another. So it's very symbolic and part of the Easter liturgy, but we're not going to be able to do feet washing. So some of us were talking about what can we do as an online equivalent for the priest to be able to demonstrate this servanthood. The best we could come up with is we all send a dirty sock to the priest, and he has to hand wash them as part of the Maundy Thursday liturgy. Now, liturgically and spiritually, that's never going to happen, but it illustrates, I think, the way that we will get through this with a mixture of deadly serious consideration for the horrible bits of it, but a good dose of humour to get beyond some of the inconveniences of all of this.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think people's levels of resilience and kind of just ability to get on with it, and, you know, and like you say, humour and things. I mean, it's funny because my husband and my son go out for a run 3 times a week now, in the mornings, and they were saying before everyone would be really supportive and you'd high five, or, you know, you'd be really encouraging. Now everyone's just ducking and diving, you know. And even yesterday when I went to the supermarket to get some things, it was like the queue and people are in separation 2 meters, whatever the distance is. And so I said, people are moving away from me, and it's for the first time in my life I know it's because I'm not a Muslim. you know. So we have to have a sense of humor in all of this. You're absolutely right. And I think we are amazing, resilient people. And I think it's important for us to remember that. But one of my kind of big questions in all of this is this whole scenario is completely unexpected. And I'm wondering, well, why is it that God has made us all press the reset button right now?
I'm not so sure it's completely unexpected, because there's been rumblings and in the medical world and the World Health Organizations about there'll be a pandemic at some point. And as awful as it is, the fact that the world is handling it as it is evidence that there's some preparations being made. But I think the reset button is a really good metaphor, I think, because we're having to value what we've taken for granted in a way that we haven't had to do. Certainly my generation hasn't had to do. Now, of course, there are individuals who've faced family crises, and there are people who've got off to war and had war happen around about them. But my generation in this part of the world hasn't really had to face that. And to have to then think about what's really important, what's valuable, what in spiritual terms do we hold on to, and what can we hang loosely towards, that's a good thing to think about. It's a shame the circumstances have to be this, but it is a very positive reevaluation of really what's crucial.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's fascinating. You know, people are starting to learn how to garden again. You know, because individuals want to be less reliant upon the supermarket for supplies. People are, there's a shortage of flour, and that must only be because people are making cakes and bread again within their own home. So there's a strange up-leveling of skills that's taking place, and even something as basic as cleaning. I'm in some groups where there's discussions about people not knowing how to clean their house because their cleaners have done it. You just think, this is forcing us to go back to basics, and I think that is a wonderful opportunity for reflection and kind of circling in and maybe drawing some of our discussions to a close, because I don't think this is going to be the last time we speak about this. But the question that, for me, the fundamental question in practical theology is, where is God in this? And I think what's happening to us at the moment is forcing everybody to think about, where is God in this? Whether you're religious or non, whether you call it God or the universe or the creator or a higher power, everyone is kind of really thinking about why this is happening and how are they going to respond, not just on a tactical manner, but also kind of more metaphysically. And I think that for me is a really important thing, because foundationally what we're doing is we're now also thinking, what are the important relationships to us and how do we maintain those? How do we maintain our relationship with God and with significant people around us, and what is our responsibility to a community? And I think those are incredible questions for us to ask.
Yeah, I think us asking that question, where is God in all of this, for me at least one bit of that answer is that God is there in the hospitals, in the care and the commitment and the self-sacrifice of our medical professionals and the support staff right across the board. And I think God is there in those Tesco vans and the Asda vans that are driving around bringing the deliveries. There is God, from my perspective, in feeding the hungry, in those who are willing to risk their own health by getting involved in that. And that's right across, for me, any religious or non-religious perspective. That's where I would want to say, well, at least there, not only there, but at least there, as the Asda delivery van or the Tesco delivery van goes by, and as someone sitting on the bus taking the risk to get to the hospital to serve others, there's something to me that speaks to me of God, at least.
I mean, I agree with you entirely, and it's a reminder actually of the roles that people have had that we've perhaps taken for granted, because all of a sudden we're praising taxi drivers and cleaners and supermarket workers and van drivers and the NHS, and that's something that has not happened in a long time. So I think certainly when I see individuals, I want to thank them for the work that they're doing and show them some level of appreciation. It's a huge shift in society that's taken place. So I think there's so many other things that we could discuss about what is happening in this kind of pivot in the world at the moment. And some of these things we'll probably continue to unpack and we'll come back to. I don't think that this is going to be our last conversation about this, but I think, I pray and I hope that all of the viewers and the listeners are able to find some solace in the conversation that we've had today. And if you've got any thoughts, or if you need any support in this experience that you're going through, then please do put a comment below either the audio or the video, and somehow we'll find some way of sending you some links or providing you with some support as well. I can only wish and pray for the best for all of us at this challenging time, and hopefully we will see you in another conversation in Practical Theology very, very soon. Thank you and goodbye.